As we get started tonight, I want to say welcome. As always, I am Bill Brown, the Director of Innovative Evangelism with the Baltimore-Washington Conference, but of course, I also resource the Peninsula Delaware Conference. Tonight, we are joined by a special guest all the way from Meredith College. Welcome to Dr. Teresa Holder. She is a professor of communications and the head of the Department of Communication at Meredith College. She has more than 20 years of experience in college teaching and higher education administration and nonprofit public relations management. She's led numerous workshops, training for managers, published articles. I think what's most important, or what I find most fascinating, is her service work, because we don't like to use the word volunteer in our Episcopal area. We are skilled servant workers. And she is as a lay leader in her church with a focus on small group ministry. She grew up as a preacher's kid. God bless you, Dr. Holder, for that. And it is a joy to welcome you tonight. As we get started, I would love to open us with a word of prayer. I'm going to give some instruction to everybody and then turn it over to you for our topic on meetings tonight. So if everyone would join with me for a word of prayer. Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks for gathering us together from around 2 states, the District of Columbia. I should even say 3 states, as we're joined by our siblings from West Virginia and now North Carolina, as Dr. Holder joins us. And although we may be in separate locations, we are united, oh God, by your Spirit, even across this technology. And so we pray that Spirit would guide us tonight, give us insight, wisdom, and understanding. Help us to take in this knowledge, and most importantly, God, help us to apply it. We give you thanks for the opportunity that we have tonight. We give you thanks that Dr. Holder is with us and ask for your blessing upon her and her talk tonight. May it enlighten us all so that we can be about this ministry of administration. We pray this all in the name of Jesus. Amen. So as we are getting started, as I like to do, I invite you to drop in the chat just your name and your church and which annual conference you're with, so everyone can get an idea that we are not alone tonight, but while all in different places, we're still all connected. So drop that in the chat. Make sure you select that you're talking to everyone. However, if you do have a question this evening, use the Q&A so that your host can follow a little easier and keep track of all the questions. So without further ado, Dr. Holder, welcome. It is a joy to have you tonight.
I hope everyone can see that. What if meetings were the favorite part of your work or ministry? And I think in many ways, they should be. I think most of us would say that we love to mentor others. We like to develop leaders. We love teamwork when it's effective. And we do a lot of small group work. And I think that working with small groups is really where we can have the greatest potential for ministry. And that involves meetings. And that's what this session is about tonight. I'm hoping that you'll recognize the things that you're doing already that are working for you. And I hope to maybe spark maybe a new idea or maybe another way of looking at things. I think some of you are so experienced, it's possible that I will not say anything brand new tonight, but I do hope that something I say will help you think about a group that you're working with in a new way. And again, thanks for Bill for the introduction. I'm Teresa Holder from Raleigh, North Carolina, and I chair the communication program at Meredith College. So thanks for being here and thanks for having me here. But before I share the agenda, I want to ask 2 icebreaker questions just to get us started. All right, so to do this, if you've got another device handy, your phone or your tablet, if you will, go ahead and log in to slido.com. You can also take a screenshot of the QR code here. And once you're there, if you type in the number there, the 2756521, this question will pop up. So let me give you a moment. If you'll go ahead and log in and let that question pop up, okay? How frequently do you attend or lead meetings?
For those who are looking forward, you'll just hear my voice for a second. I did drop that link also in the chat.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. Answers are still coming in, but right now the most common answer is monthly. All right, it looks like right now that about half of us would say monthly, the next weekly. I'm going to wait just a minute more. Some answers are still coming in. We'll let it settle here. Again, just how frequently do we attend? Again, about half say monthly, right? I'm going to move on to the next question. So how do you feel after most meetings? Energized and clear, neutral, frustrated and confused? Again, just an icebreaker question. No right or wrong here. It looks like most of the group are somewhere in the middle, right? Neither necessarily positive, meaning energized and clear, or negative as in frustrated or confused, but somewhere in the middle. All right. Just a couple icebreakers. One thing I'm going to ask you to do, if you have a pen handy, a piece of paper, there's going to be a couple times when I'm going to ask you to reflect on something I'm going to ask. And that way we might bring it up during the Q&A. So if you've got a pen and a piece of paper, there's sometimes I'm going to ask you maybe respond to something that's on the screen that we can address a little bit later. Okay. A lot of people are right in the middle, about 2/3 of those who've responded. Okay. Thanks for answering those questions. All right. So here's our agenda for tonight, for the next hour. One, I want to start with building on what you know and what you're doing already that works well for you. And that's a good place to start. I want you to keep doing those things. The second is where some things might be more difficult or difficult dynamics. I want to suggest some tools that you may be using or skills to help manage more difficult dynamics in meetings. And then we're also going to take a look at a brief case study that I think will resonate with most of us. We'll have experienced something similar and reflect on what do we think is going on in that situation? What have you done in a similar situation? Or what could you do in a situation? Okay, so those are our main points for tonight. The first thing in terms of just building on things that you're probably doing already is one, it's important to communicate a clear objective or agenda. And an agenda is so basic, we often don't even talk about it. But it is a thing that keeps the group focused and on task. And some of our groups may require that we do an agenda and do minutes. But a lot of our more formal groups also need to have a clear objective or objective or agenda. So when I meet with a department, I may announce that meeting, remind people about the meeting by email, but I'll also just put a brief agenda in the email with bullet points. And so even if we're doing a rather small group, just simply starting the meeting by this is our objective tonight, this is what we want to accomplish is pretty important. So it's, even though our meetings may be less formal than having official agenda meetings, minutes, it's important that we do that. You might have a group that doesn't know each other very well. And so it might be an important objective is for you to build in perhaps an icebreaker to begin each meeting so that people are getting to know each other over time. I'm a big believer in food, and so it may be that food before or after a meeting may help the group get to know each other better and to socialize in some way. This semester, I've led a small group Bible study, a group of professional women meeting once a week, and we know the objective, we know the agenda, right? We know the parts of the evening. But my objective for that group this semester has been for us to begin and end on time. Because this group is pretty familiar with each other, we don't have to teach caring and confidentiality or any of those parts, but to start on time and end on time without feeling I'm cutting people off or I'm rushing people takes some skill. And that's got to be the thing that's important to that group for it to function on an ongoing basis. So it's really the key for us to function well, because we're not a community Bible study meeting in a church where we can be more rule driven. We're meeting in someone's home. And so it's an informal group. People are coming from work, they're traveling for work, but yeah, it's so important that we begin and end on time. So that's really become the objective because we've got all the other parts connected. The next skill or tactic that we often use is making sure that we manage our time. And I've already said with this Bible study group I've been facilitating for, how critical it is that we start on time, that we end on time, and maintaining that is just kind of part of the culture. But I think for all of our meetings, it's important that we do that so people know what to expect. And most of our meetings, may be about an hour long. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. I talked with my mom recently, and she's in a Bible study, and they have no end time. And I said, well, how does that work? And she said, well, sometimes we finish after an hour and a half, and sometimes it's two. And I quizzed her about that. And there's a number of Bible studies going on. Some are in the evening, some are in the morning. She said, all of them kind of do that. And she is too polite to get up and leave, but one of her friends does. And that's not the kind of dynamic that we want to foster. And so it's so critical that we start and stop on time. So again, most meetings can be completed in an hour. If we have the opportunity where conversation is overflowing, I think it's important to say, let's pick up here for the next meeting, or maybe we continue the conversation by email, or maybe in some other method. I have a group that uses Slack. And so if a conversation or discussion would spill over, what we might do is pick it up on Slack. We don't do that in a great way, but it is something that we have a mechanism for. But again, that's so critical, especially in our culture, even with streaming services, we're bound by a start and stop time. And in another culture, we might not do that. But I think it's important to most of our groups to do that, so that even if we say, do you mind if we go over, there's someone who may not speak up. And so people need to know to be predictable, that they can trust that that we honor the time, we respect each other's time. And if we spill over, cool, but let's move it to the next meeting agenda. Also, it's important that we engage participants and foster open communication. So one of the ways that we can do that is to do maybe brainstorming. I've been on a task force this semester, and we had about 3 45-minute sessions where we were inviting the whole campus community to come and brainstorm in 45 minutes. But what we did strategically is we scheduled a classroom that was surrounded by whiteboards. And what we did when people came, and we gave a brief introduction and asked one question, asked people to bring dry erase markers with them. We had them there, and we just asked people to get up and go write on the boards. That is so different than if people remain seated and and we just talked and took notes with a Google form. But just getting people up, walking around, looking at each other's answers, and starting to see clusters. What happened in that is that we got down to business very quickly. We engaged the group, and we were able to get a lot of information. Of course, we were taking notes, and we built on that with each of the meetings. But we were able to engage them and get a lot of information in 45 minutes. In one of my groups, I always say, I've always asked for questions, but I've said at the end of every meeting, I'm going to stay behind in case you have questions, if you need something or if you have questions. And it's amazing to me, even though the members could have asked the question in the meeting, most of the time, 3 or 4 people will stay behind and line up to ask a question. And so even going to a meeting a little early, maybe setting up, just being there early or staying a little late, people might strike up a conversation with you that they might not have if you didn't do that. Even brainstorming, I mentioned that with the task force where we really got down to business with this diverse group, large group that we were trying to get information from. But you could use brainstorming as a way to engage members of the group too, especially if you're trying to get quieter members to speak up. So you may have people just do some might pitch a question to the group and have people do some writing, brainstorming individually before you open it up for discussion. I'm a big believer in doing breakout groups. And so I may do that so that if I have groups in 3 or 4, then I know that I'll have everybody talking. If I ask that same question to a group of 25 or 30, the same high participators are going to be the ones who speak up. And those who are intimidated by that size of a group, and especially if it's larger than that, then you keep repeating that pattern. Once a month in my life class at church, we take turns leading. We set aside that Sunday, the 4th Sunday of the month, for prayer. And each of us take a different Sunday. And there's a group of probably 20 to 25. But every time I've led that group, What I've done that's a little different than maybe what other people have done is I do breakout groups. I have people, I ask them to move around, perhaps sit with someone they don't know as well. The couples kind of break up. And so in small groups of three, I provide 3x5 cards. I have pens handy, and I just ask them to do a check-in and find out. And they might spend the time in prayer, sharing requests and praying. But I also said, if you want to spend your time just checking in and letting your small group know how you're doing, and develop a list of prayer requests that the three of you will commit to praying for in the next week. What happens with that is that people are sharing things in that small group of three they never would have shared in a group of 25. It might have seemed insignificant to the large group. It's not something I would ask for prayer for. And yet in the smaller group, that's what's happening. And even if they spend that time just sharing and then walk away to pray during the week, they've got that card that's easy to tuck into their Bible or tuck into a pocket, and they've covenanted to pray for each other. So there's all kinds of ways that you can engage a group using brainstorming techniques or breakout techniques that can do that, right? Also, create meetings that are action oriented. We're familiar with someone being a facilitator and maybe someone taking the minutes, but there's other roles that we can incorporate into groups so that there's shared leadership. One, we might be able to rotate facilitation or rotate who takes minutes. And you might have a running Google file, for example, if you're just keeping notes and that you just keep adding to that. You might assign different people to take notes and then let that person be the one who summarizes the meeting before you leave. And again, it can be a way to engage quieter members in the group by giving them a task. So rotate roles, but small groups will benefit from taking notes and providing summaries. People might volunteer to set up a room, even facilitating or doing follow-up tasks. So try to be action-oriented in the groups. Also, be mindful of group's energy. As I said before, most meetings can be accomplished in about an hour. I have classes that are 80 minutes long, and no one could sit there for that length of time. And so definitely I break it up we do case studies, we do breakout groups, but I also have a stretch break in there. And so know if you're in a room that's too warm or too cold, or the meeting's long, or the seating's not comfortable, or people need a stretch break. But all those things can be mindful of when you're scheduling meetings, and just be mindful of the energy. And also part of that is how long should your meetings be? I've had friends who were part of leadership in the church and said that their meetings didn't have any end time. That just went on. And that just doesn't work. People need to have that predictability about that. And then finally, provide a clear summary and next steps. Summarize, what have we said today? What have we done today? What's left to do? What are we moving to the next meeting? And what do we need to do before the next meeting? And who's going to do it? So providing a clear summary and next steps can be a good way to wrap up the meeting. I want you to take a moment, and I asked you to, if you have a pen handy, I want you to think for just a couple of minutes about what you're doing right now that you feel seems to be working pretty well. Would you make a note about it there in your notes? All right, we're going to move on to one more Slido question. And what would you say are your biggest challenges when managing meetings? And you can answer more than one here. I think everybody may have had a chance already. Again, you could answer more than one here. And if you will, if you've answered the question, maybe make a note of what from this list would you say is the greatest challenge. It looks like it's not surprising that managing difficult conversations is the highest on the list. But for you personally, what would you say is of this list is the most challenging for you? And make a note of that in your notes. I'll pause until we think everybody's had a chance to answer. All right, I think we're good. So again, managing difficult conversations is right up there for most of us. Staying on time, and then also following up. All of these are common issues. Again, we're going to talk next about some tools that we might use to manage some of those more difficult dynamics. The things we've talked about so far, the idea of having an agenda, paying attention to time and energy, engaging and being action oriented. Those are things that I imagine you're using already and doing so effectively. All right, so let's move on. So my second point tonight is that some tools that we can use when the dynamics are challenging. And one of is location and environment, group rules and roles, remaining calm and composed in our demeanor despite what might happen, observe, listen, but lead, intervene when needing, and then also creating an effective meeting culture. So let's talk about those things next. One is location and environment. I can't underscore how important this is. And we're not even managing people per se with doing this. But for example, a retreat is called a retreat for a reason, right? Because we get off campus. You may have a group that just maybe goes to a restaurant, meets in another room off campus in some way, away from the church, and just being in a different environment, you may feel more relaxed. And some of the scripts, some of the patterns that might happen in a meeting that's at the church, you're just if you're in a more comfortable setting, you may get to know each other better. The conversation may be more relaxed. So I'm part of the fellows program here in Raleigh, and in years past, I've been doing it for about a decade. All the fellows would come to Raleigh, to downtown, to Eaton Street, and we would do the training there. And since the pandemic, they reorganized the fellows program from 2 years to 9 months. But one of the biggest changes is that they moved it to a Trinity Center, which is in Salter Path, and that's on the eastern North Carolina coast at the beach. And it's this great conference center. And so the idea is that it's just more relaxed. There's a completely different rhythm. The facilitators get to interact with the fellows while they're there. And so it's so different than them coming to downtown Raleigh and being there and staying in a hotel and staying in Raleigh. And so again, the idea of that setting has changed the impact of the group. A few years ago, I was leading an organization-wide change project, and it would take 3 years. And what was interesting about this is that there were stories of people being really successful and others being, a failure and having to do it over again. And I definitely didn't want to invest time and energy into something that turned out to be a failure. But the large meeting space, the tiered auditorium where the full faculty would make decisions, there was a weird script happening in that space. And people didn't talk about it like, oh, I can't believe, we know it was happening, but people weren't necessarily talking about it or acknowledging it. But for example, we might just spin round and around about a small initiative or a small proposal and go round and round about it. And then large initiatives, large proposals sometimes would not even be discussed. And I don't know, part of it may be that we couldn't get down to the largeness of it, but it was strange. And I thought, we're not going to take interim reports, internal goals. Nothing's going to happen in that room until we're ready to submit the final proposal. So we met everywhere else. We met every 6 months. We did updates, but I was able to get the provost to give us a food budget, and we might be in on the president's dining room or somewhere else. But we broke down that project and got buy-in along the way and did 6-month reports. And we did not ask for a vote or present the final proposal for that change project until the very end in that room. And it passed with unanimous support. But I was so aware that the group, whether they acknowledge it or not, just had some interesting patterns of decision-making and discussion and scripts, so that the location mattered. And so, think about that. Is there a need to change the location because it's more conducive for discussion? Think about having a discussion and you're sitting in traditional pews where you can't see each other. It can make a difference. I was on a leadership team where we had a large meeting, and then the smaller leadership teams would break out for part of the meeting, and our group was on a different floor. So we had to go to a different floor, and we had about 30 to 40 minutes for our meeting. And again, the room was set up in a traditional classroom setup. And we had to make the decision, are we going to take the time to rearrange the room for this short meeting? Because we'd have to reset it after we met. And the co-leader and I decided, yes, we need to, because it impacted how this group discussed. And there was probably about 20 people in this volunteer group. And so we decided that we would take the time to set up the room and reset it, even for that 30 to 40-minute meeting, because it changed the dynamics of the discussion and the dynamics of decision making. So again, location can mean a lot of different things, but it's about, is it the right environment where people can get away because we're building a team, or we're having deeper discussions, but that can make a huge difference. One time I was probably mediating some long-term conflict between two departments. And I knew I wasn't going to get down to the bottom of it, and I didn't. But one of the parties I knew was a walker. And so I told her one day, I said, I want you to, bring your walking shoes, and we're just going to go walk. And that's what we did. And I said, I'm going to bring my little notebook, and I'm just going to take some notes, but I just want you to tell me what's going on. And so by just walking side by side, shoulder to shoulder, just talking it out, and my taking some notes, one allowed me to acknowledge from her perspective what was going on, also to listen and to ask clarifying questions. But that was a way just to get completely out of a meeting mode, being in an office, and say, let's go walk and talk, and let me see if I can understand at least around the margins of this conflict. So location and environment can be huge, and it really can change the dynamic of the group. Also, group rules and roles can be important for managing the group and managing dynamics. So, but rules and process can help the decision making as well. For example, I have a group where all the information is confidential. And so at the beginning, when we started the group, and then periodically we talk about that, we remind the group that all information here is confidential and what that means. And so we talk about that. There's a couple roles that I find really helpful that you may or may not have heard of and you may have used, but one is a process observer, and one that I'm sure you have heard, is devil's advocate. And these are roles that can help a group just function better. And the process observer is exactly what it sounds like. What you would have is that someone in the group would just step back from the discussion for that meeting and be a process observer. In other words, the process observer might, in the middle of the meeting, said, we haven't heard from any of the women in the group. We've not heard from any young people in the group. We said that on the agenda, we said we were going to spend, the most important item was this, and we were going to spend, reserve 20 minutes to talk about this item, but we haven't even gotten to it yet. Or we said we're going to spend 5 minutes on this item, we've spent 15. So we're just commenting on the process. It's neutral, it's factual, but what it can do is it can bring the group back to the agenda. It can bring the group back to the task, and it can simply comment on the process, whatever that might be. A devil's advocate can be a role, and it's a good role to assign maybe someone who's often a quieter member, because there's some of us who are quiet, but if you give us a task, we're going to do it. And so maybe you assign someone to be the questioner. Why would we do this? And what about this? And so it's, again, we would do that because we want to have better process, and we're wanting to change the dynamics. And also it can help equalize or create more balance in who's participating if we have some high participators and people who tend to fall quiet or silent in some way. But when we set the rules and we honor them, then the group will adopt them. And so that's really important that we were able to do that. And sometimes it's having conversations about, where, if we're doing this task force, for example, or this big project, all of us have stories of when a group didn't go well and we didn't enjoy it. And so maybe that's a starting place to talk about, what do we want to be characteristic of our group? What rules do we want to have? What do we want to do? One of the best examples came from my grad work, and I was at a university, and there was a large public event. It was a national journalism person. And at the end of the presentation, there was probably about 5,000 people in the auditorium. We had Q&A. And the moderator gave the rules for asking questions. One, I think you had about 30 seconds to ask a question. a single question, and it wasn't to be a soapbox. You weren't allowed to get up there and just make a statement. And so there were a few questions, and then again, someone stood up, came to the mic, and started making a commentary, a statement. And the moderator stood and said, just want to remind, very kindly and neutrally said, just want to remind everybody, these are the rules for our Q&A, and then sat back down. Again, a couple questions. And then shortly after that, it happened again. But what happened the second time is, I can only describe it as a roar. The whole audience roared. It's like there was rumbling. I don't know if people were tapping their feet or what it was, but I was so amazed by the fact that even if the audience didn't agree with it, like, oh, that's not a good rule, they honored the rule that the moderator had set and then immediately enforced. When it was broken, he enforced it. And so when it happened the second time, the audience took care of it. He didn't have to be the bad guy. He didn't have to sound like a principal in the room. The audience, basically told the person standing up at the mic, please sit down, right? And so again, it happens in groups too. Once you've gotten the group to abide, create that boundary, accept that a boundary, then they will enforce it, and the group will manage itself. The facilitator or the leader doesn't have to keep doing that, which is pretty remarkable when you see that happens, because when the group adopts it. Okay. In addition, be calm and composed. I have been yelled at in meetings. And so regardless of what's said or the frustration that might be shared, simply be calm, be factual, be composed. You can process it later. You might be churning on the inside, but you don't have to reveal that. Last night I was at our annual homeowners association meeting, and usually there's something, that comes up like, why are we doing this or why that, why this decision? And I thought that, I thought the board president handled it very well. But be calm and composed, be factual, and be neutral. And so part of that is just managing those emotions as it's happening. Focus on facts and not feelings. Another tool that can be really helpful is observe, listen, yet lead. One of my former bosses, sometimes he would just put a discussion item out to the group, and he knew our pattern. He would put it out and he'd let us just kind of churn and discuss it for about 20 minutes, and then we would wind down. We had kind of come to a place of some kind of agreement or conclusion. And so he'd just summarize and bring us back. But he knew that this group would do that. So he allowed for that. And I think it's about finding that right balance. Even though people may need to discuss things, but keep everybody on task. If they go off a little bit or spend too much time on an agenda item, it's our role as a leader to bring people back to the agenda in our budget of time. I mentioned the agenda and I mentioned the HOA meeting last night. One of the things I saw in the agenda last night was they had actually itemized the time that would be spent on all the agenda items as a way to keep communicating that and to keep us on track. And also intervene. As leaders, we may need to do this. And so one, it may be if we're in person or in a situation like Zoom, we may have to put our hand up and say, I need to stop you there. So we need to be prepared to interrupt if needed. If someone is violating a rule or there's something that borders on egregious, then we have to be able to interrupt. But acknowledge the speaker. We often talk about feedback sandwich, where we acknowledge the speaker, provide the feedback, but then acknowledge the speaker. So, for example, I might say, that's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up. I hear what you're saying. I appreciate your saying that. And while we can't address that in this meeting, I'm willing to talk about it at our next meeting. I think you raise a good point. While we can't get into that now, let's park it for now. And often we use the word park. If I've got a whiteboard, I might write it on the whiteboard. So it's a visual reminder that I'm acknowledging that comment or that issue or that topic. And then I might be able to come back to it at the end of the meeting, right? But I haven't just said, minimized it, but I might park it there and come back. But again, we may have to say, I've got to stop you there. I agree it's important. We need to focus on what's on our agenda for today, but it's something we can take up. Thank you. We need to focus on these agenda items, but I'm happy to talk with you about it at the end of the meeting. So I'm giving some example language, but this is an example where you know your group and you know the likelihood of something like this happening. And so I think it's helpful to craft, what is it that you would say in this moment? How would you interrupt? What would you say to acknowledge a speaker? And how would you manage that? I think that's helpful to prepare the language that you might use in that setting, so that you can redirect and you can decide what makes sense. Is it that, yes, we can put it on the agenda for next meeting, or we can talk about it afterwards, or we can park it by writing it on the board. We might loop back to it and that kind of thing. And then finally, develop a culture of meeting effectiveness. When a group does well, it's really a remarkable thing. When there's great teamwork and it's effective, it's remarkable. And so I think developing groups where there's a pride of that we are a functioning group. To have something like a process observer or a devil's advocate in a volunteer group might sound a little bit weird, except if we're wanting to be in a very effective group. And so we pride ourselves in doing that. Maybe we're developing leaders, so we rotate facilitation. We rotate who's taking the notes. We rotate who might be doing different roles and who's doing the follow-up. But that can be something that everybody takes pride in, because you're running a good meeting. Years ago, when I was teaching, I would teach a course, PR campaigns, and the seniors would actually work with clients. So they were doing actual entry-level professional work. And on the first day, I would say, your ability for your team to work together, your good process is really going to shape the quality of your work at the end of the semester. I'd say that on the first day. And we used a peer behavioral inventory. I presented it on the first day. And what they would do is at the end of the semester, I'd have them evaluate each other. And it was very operational, meaning in terms of communication, this person spoke up, generated ideas, or did this person wait to be told what to do? Or if this person has to be late, they'll contact the group members. In other words, it was very specific about what we mean by effective communication, interpersonal relationship, reliability. All of those things were operationalized. And students couldn't give an extreme number like a 1 or a 5 without explaining or defending it. And then also on this instrument, they had a pie, and they said, okay, you've got 4 members in your team. Draw a pie about what percentage of contribution each member made to the total. And when there had been great process, when the group had functioned well together, it was 25, 25, 25%. And sometimes they go, oh yeah, everybody pulled their weight. However, this person really led. So they were quick to give credit where credit was due. When the group did not do well with the process, it was distorted. Like, I did 75% of the work and this person did 25%. I mean, it was distorted, but it impacted the quality of the work. And even though I said at the very beginning, unfortunately, one group in here will not accomplish what you need to accomplish. And it never failed. That the idea that the group who had not been able to function well with their process, manage that, didn't evaluate each other well at the end, but it also affected their project. So developing a culture of meeting effectiveness, and part of that's our taking the time to reset the room because we realize how important that was, and not get lazy about that, or keeping minutes even though our group doesn't have to do that, but that way we have a good memory, and we are also assigning roles and rotating roles, starting on time, ending on time, managing the difficulty of staying on time, or developing clear objectives. When we're able to do that, there is that source of pride that we're doing well and we're working as a good team. So this one, I don't know if you want to take a picture of this, but I thought I'd take just a few minutes to let you read through this case situation and reflect on it. This may be familiar to you. You may have your own version of this kind of scenario. So again, with that pen and paper on the side, if you would maybe react to what you see here, what stands out to you about this case study? What have you done in a similar situation? What do you think you would do in a similar situation if you haven't experienced it? Or what do you think's going on with that situation? But if you'll read through and take some notes, we can talk about this when we get to Q&A. So let me just give you a few minutes just to read through that and maybe make some notes about what you see here. All right, we're going to go ahead and move to the Q&A. I think Bill has put it in the chat so you can still see it, right? Okay.
It is there. Excellent.
Okay. All right, so I think Bill said if you want to use the Q&A to ask questions, if you still have Slido up, you can also ask an anonymous question here if you like. Okay.
All righty. Well, you did generate quite a few questions. I think the scenario, I don't resonated with people. I mean, I think I've seen in the chat, I think the scenario happens more often than we may want to admit. One person said, I've thought about it before, and now I'm sure I've been the difficult person in a few meetings. Another person says, this sounds like our church, but I get to go first. You just caused a lot of thoughts. I love how you talked about using meetings as an opportunity for faith formation rather than just to get the business done. And I think people really need to hear that. And so I appreciate you saying that. And I also appreciate you coming back and also talking about using meetings as leadership development. I appreciate because we get so focused on getting the business done that we miss those opportunities to form ourselves in the faith and to develop other leaders. But a couple of questions I do have is, you talked about the devil's advocate, which I think is wonderful. What happens when you assign someone as the devil's advocate, however, in the room is a devil's advocate because of their personality?
Yeah, I've been in a meeting once, a group once, when he said, and I had a member say, I am the devil's advocate. I mean, because he always played that role. And so I think when you have that, that's where you want to kind of shift that task to someone else. And it could be, and what I find that sometimes, like this person in this scenario, sometimes what I have seen is that sometimes that person is one of the most prepared people in the group. And sometimes that person is always there. And so sometimes I see as I need to balance the group, meaning I need to empower other members in the group who are intimidated to balance out. So sometimes that imbalance happens because someone is more prepared than others and they're asking the why questions. And so I find that empowering the group through roles and through agreed upon rules of behavior can help balance that. Just a quick story. I do our favorite topic in the leaders program is managing conflict in the church. That's my assignment as a facilitator. And one of the things I do with that group in training is I use the communication preference questionnaire. It's based on personality, but it identifies preferred language style. And I talk some about language preferences and style. And sometimes it's by gender or region. This is on personality. And what I do is I divide the group up according to how they scored. So they're writing, I give them a message, they're a senior pastor. I give them a difficult message that they need to craft for the the monthly newsletter. They've got to address something with the church. And so it's easy assignment for them because they're writing with people who speak the same language. But what's interesting is when the feelers versus the thinkers read their letters, the thinkers laugh at the feelers. I mean, not aloud, but they do. And the feelers are aghast at the thinkers because they use language differently. In another setting, when we talk about principles of good communication, we want to incorporate all the things from what they are for language preferences, to be succinct, to use bullets, to be clear, to be organized, to have goodwill, right? What we do is we build all of those elements. But when you have people just simply writing to their natural style, the feelers are very emotional. They apologize by having to give back negative news, and the thinkers seem too aggressive. But my point with doing that exercise is that sometimes we treat style as conflict. We take it literally. And so I would say, in part, to give this person the benefit of the doubt, to understand what's behind the what and the why. And is there a way to redirect this energy that you may be getting from this person? And there's some people, as we know, are just going to, for lack of a better way of saying it, are going to be more negative than others. And I have, in one of my groups, I have this person who probably is that devil's advocate, but the person also is always well prepared and has good opinions. But, and so in other words, can you harness that so that you are taking advantage of the skill and the energy this person's bringing to the group, but can you empower the group to manage the group better so that you're not the only one as the leader or facilitator who's doing that. So the group needs to mature so that they're able to handle that.
I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. If
Yeah.
you could stop sharing screens, I've got Slido open up on my tablet, so I'll
Okay.
see those questions,
Okay.
and that way we can
Okay.
see you. But for that last one about letting the group manage the process, someone did say, asking the Slido, can you take a vote to see who disagrees or agrees with the person who's dominating the meeting? Is that a recommended?
I don't know for sure. I think
Okay.
I think all of my points as far as the tool is to say, step back and look, is the group doing well? And I think sometimes you talk about it as a group.
Okay.
If you feel like things are going off or things, and I think you say that. I said, I'm concerned about how our conversation went in our last meeting or where we are as a group. I think you talk about it, it's that meta communication because we often don't do that. We don't talk about stuff, right? And so we talk around it, but we don't talk to people. And so I think you do, and you try to have some honest conversations. This is not totally related, but one time I was leading a Bible study, and I had a really mixed group in there, some very young believers and people who'd been doing it for 25 years. And I knew that there was going to be an imbalance in participation. And so one of the things I did, I used a take on the talking stick. You know how in families you have a stuffed animal and you can have a family powwow. That's what we called them. Family powwows in my family. And whoever had the stick had the turn. And so it gives you a chance to be respectful, take turns and speak and be heard. But anyway, what I did is I put a little basket in the middle of our circle and I gave everybody 3 pennies. And I said, I want us to work on this. I want us to take turns answering questions or contributing. And when you're out of pennies, you're out of pennies. If you look down, you got 2 pennies, you got to speak up. And we used it with a little bit of humor.
Right.
But what it did, it helped the group be conscious of turn taking. Like, I need to speak up or I need to step back. And what happened once everybody had kind of adopted that, we no longer need the basket or the pennies. But there may be something that you can do as a group to say, look, we got a really mixed group in here, younger people who've been in the church for a long time. And we want to hear from everybody. We want to hear from the women and the men, the young people and the people who've been around. And so find a way that maybe helps naturally shape the interaction. And I think that pre-writing, that pre-brainstorming, or breaking groups out and saying, here's the question, I want you to talk about this in your group of 3. And then let the group speak and then bring the group together. Because what that does, it takes you from maybe 4 people participating to everybody participating and then coming back together. And I find that when I've got a group where there's quieter people who are not going to speak up, they will speak up in that small group and then let the group speak, together and then bring that together. So I think there's some things you can do with dynamics. My instinct is that I wouldn't want to feel like I ganged up on a person. I'd want to understand what's going on with that person. And also, what are we doing outside the meetings? Am I able to have coffee with that person and get to know that person in a better way? Do I know that person's story? Do I know that person's spiritual journey? Because again, one of the secrets for handling conflict is that when the relationship is good, when times are good, you build a relationship. And so then when things aren't good, you have the relationship reserves to draw on. And so that's why sometimes changing the environment, getting to know people, getting them out of the regular scripted or pattern situation, like us doing that big change project, and we were not going to be in that tiered auditorium until we were ready. We knew that we had buy-in. So, my point is, look at what's going on. Do you have that kind of scenario? Do you have that kind of person? And what is going on? What do you think's going on? And how could you be strategic about it?
Well,
It's that auditorium where the whole audience just started roaring and tapping their feet, and they put that student in his place because he had violated the rule, and the moderator didn't have to do it after he had established it and followed up. Early on, he didn't let it go. He didn't let it pass.
we do have a number of questions around the social dynamic piece. So I don't know if this is the easy one or not, but we'll start with a non-conflict. Do you have strategies, or do you have a strategy to deal with social dynamics, particularly between men and women in a meeting?
I'd want more information about that.
Okay. So our question asker, I'll just use the first name, Shane. If you can elaborate on your question, we'll come back to you. So just go ahead and drop that elaboration in the Q&A. That would be great. How about, we have several people ask, what do you do with that person who just goes on and on and on? How do you redirect, or how do you challenge? How do you get them back on topic? What are some?
In our meeting last night, there was an open forum, and we had 3 minutes. If we spoke up, we had 3 minutes to do that. And so part of it, I think you can use humor. In other words, like I used humor with the group where I was trying to kind of equalize participation. And maybe there's a way where you talk about it. In other words, maybe as the group is forming, you talk about what because people have had good experience and bad experience, and maybe you put some rules in place based on that experience, and then you let the group kind of create that, and then and you maybe you do something like that you keep questions brief or participations brief, and until the group can adopt that and normalize it. So try different things. Some things will work, some things won't. But I think that not talking about it is the worst thing, right? Not and I think part of it is, how are we doing? Let's take a pause. How are we doing as a group? Maybe we write that, and maybe someone's mentioned that, and you read it. It's anonymous, and it's, hey, some people can't get a word in edgewise because Holder keeps talking, right? And so I think you let somebody say that anonymously, and you share that with the group, and then you talk about what do we do about that? How can we change that? Because once you're on a journey to be an effective group, once you've said, hey, that's what we want to be, because we're developing leaders here, that's what we're doing. We want to have pride in the way we handle our meetings and our process.
So someone brings up the question, it kind of relates to that. If you do have that person and they just won't let it go, you've tried the diplomatic approaches, you've tried the group process approach. Is there a way to withdraw someone's invitation from attending meetings without being too harsh?
Well, I think I would first try to talk with that individual.
Okay.
And do a one-on-one intervention. I know intervention is like a big word, but that's probably what I would try to do. And because you know what? It's interesting. This was years ago, a friend in our friend group controlled the group because he'd constantly look at his watch. And finally, we talked about it behind his back. And finally, two of us kind of confronted him about it. It's like, you control the group because you keep looking at your watch. And honestly, it was a blind spot. This was a seminary student, and it was a blind spot. And once we brought it to his attention, he stopped doing it. And I thought, oh my goodness, it was so chronic. It's such a big deal for the rest of us. Never would we have guessed it was a blind spot for him. So I think you have to give people the benefit of the doubt. In other words, going back to that person, there's a reason why that person is that way. And it could be style, like I talked about the thinkers. They learn by asking questions. They tend to ask why questions. To a feeler, that's like, that's just terrible. And so I think you give the person the benefit of the doubt, but try to get to the bottom of what's behind the what, and get some feedback. And you might personally say, can you step back a little bit? Because you've been part of this church or this group for a long time, and I'd like to see you do that. And you may be able to get some buy-in and cooperation one-on-one in private.
Now,
sometimes that's worked, sometimes it hasn't in my situation, but worth a try.
one of the things that we're exploring as an annual as Episcopal areas, two annual conferences, is the foundation and the importance of relationship undergirding everything. You know, discipleship begins with relationship, leadership begins with relationship, and if the only time you're seeing that person is at that once a month meeting,
Yeah.
and that's your only experience with that person, there is no relationship. So I really appreciate you stressing that. Now, my good friend Shane's come back with some additional information. They've talked about that they have a separate men and women's group, and sometimes it's hard for the men to speak up and participate. And then sometimes when it's a mixed group, the men who find it difficult to participate don't, and the women in the group then tend to participate more. So how do you, and even if it's not male and female, how do you introvert, extrovert? What are some strategies for encouraging people who may not participate to engage, and those who may be overly willing to participate to sit back and give other people an opportunity?
Yeah, I think as I understand that situation, I probably would do the breakout groups because in a lot of cases, it's just as easy to just open up to the whole group. But the reason why I would do some type of breakout, or in education, we call it think, pair, share, right? I might have paired people, but the idea is to get everybody participating in a way that's comfortable to them. And also to slow down the process. Because an introvert, if you throw out a question to the group, and I'm an introvert. If I'm in a car with three women, I fall silent because I cannot keep up with them, in the car talking, and so, I think that just it's slowing down the process a little bit, giving people a chance to think about it, and even to do that 3x5, to write something, then partner with someone, then you might partner then with two other people. So that might be a way that you can kind of bypass all of those dynamics, the introvert, extrovert, the high participators, low participators, the men and women. That might be a way to help navigate some of that, I think, because you've slowed it down and you've given everybody a chance. Everybody will have participated. And then you might, if I had a group of, let's say, 4, I might go around and say, would you be the scribe for your group? And would you be the spokesperson for your group? So I might appoint that. And, it's a safe environment. I make it safe, but that way I'm helping change the dynamics because I'm asking certain people to do different roles.
Well, I also hear you. I mean, again, it's back to that leadership development. You're also teaching people how to participate in meetings,
Yes.
teaching
Yes.
them how to engage in.
Yes.
I love that. Back to your case study, we have 2 questions. What if, like in some of these situations where somebody is dominating or somebody is the devil's advocate all the time, even if they're not assigned to it, what do you do in the situation if that person seems to be on every committee in the church? Particularly some of our smaller churches have
Right.
people who are on multiple committees. Any scenarios or any strategies for dealing with that, or do we just continue to go back to that idea of building the relationship outside of the meeting?
Again, I'm a big believer in rotating roles. And
Okay.
so, because that way, it doesn't work if everybody's somewhat, you assign the devil's advocate to one person all the time, but rotate that and empower people to be that. Like you have to coach people about what that means, but it gives people a chance to be critical. Like, I'm going to take this seriously. But on the other side, I would probably ask that person to keep minutes because that
Okay.
person often is very detailed and has good knowledge. And so I would not be heavy-handed about it, but I would try to give that person a role that allow that person to step back naturally. And that person might be a good process observer, but especially to take minutes.
Now, what if I'm going to go over to Slido for a second? What if the challenging person is the team leader, and maybe they're not communicating with the team or sharing information with the team, and the team feels like they can't complete their goals? So it's not somebody on the committee, but it's the person leading. If you're a committee member, how do you deal with that?
Again, it comes back to relationship when if at all possible. But I think part of it is having the courage to say, here's something that you could do I need your help with something, or this is something that I could use your help with. And again, it's easier if the relationship is there, but to be able to say, can I offer you some feedback? And that's very daunting to do something like that. But I think that, if any place we can do that, it's in the church, right? Because we talk about being teachable, we talk about being servant leaders. And I would find a way, and that maybe that needs to be in writing, so that you can, uh, you know, be thoughtful about it. And like I said, if I'm going to if I'm going to interrupt someone, it's nice to have that sentence I'm going to use, right? I'd probably think about what am I going to say when I have to interrupt or intervene in a meeting to really call somebody out, right? Because they're going outside the boundaries. But I think finding a way to just provide that feedback, and I just want to appreciate that you're leading and you've helped me in X this way, but I wanted to offer um, some feedback or some reaction and do that and hope that it's received as it was meant to be received.
And that resonates because I know when you call somebody out in the meeting, that's when the heat dials up. That's when the
Yes.
conflict. It's
Yes.
usually when it's
Yeah.
afterwards, or even using the scenario. I need help keeping track of everything that's going on. Could you share some more information with me after the meeting?
Right.
I mean, I think
Right.
you are spot on. Now, you did have a little section about being calm and composed, and the question really came in: how do I be calm and composed?
You just pretend. I have been yelled at in meetings, and I thought, you know what? I when I came to Meredith, they wanted a senior person to create change, and the subtext was, "We're so glad to have you. We want you to create change as long as you don't create any change, and we want we want you we want you to do this as long as you don't ask anything of us." I mean, there was a subtext there, and the person who was probably who tried to bully me the most is now a dear friend. He's retired now, but he became a dear friend. I won him over, and but yet it just takes some time to be able to get there. But I think you have to say, what is the right thing? What should I be doing? What does it mean to be a leader? And to be a leader meant that I needed to say, I know we've been doing this, but we need to go here and do this, because that was my job. And I was yelled at, and other people like, oh, we hate conflict, but again, just be calm and cool and collective. And I feel punched in the gut, and I go home, and it takes me about 24 hours to recover, but I feel it inside. I feel it. It's not like, oh yeah, no worries at all. No, I do. But I've learned it takes me about 24 hours to let it go. And then I'm able to let it go thinking, would I have done anything differently? No, because I needed to do my job.
Well,
But I could be calm. And that does take some effort, and it does. But
and I know I am getting the sense you're not taking it, you're not saying it lightly, fake it, but it's doing the job and then releasing the tension later. Um, it's part of our most people don't know, fake it till you make it is part of our Wesleyan heritage. When Peter Bowler says to John Wesley, have faith or preach faith until you have it, and when you have faith,
yes,
preach it. And so
yes.
be calm until you're,
I loved it recently. Our pastor mentioned, he goes, there's sometimes where I just don't want to come to church. But I go, well, I have to because I'm preaching, And I appreciate that so much, because I thought he was acknowledging how sometimes the feelings do not match.
Right.
And so I think that that's a reminder that just what is the right thing to do the right thing, and eventually the emotions will catch up.
I hate to say it, sometimes it takes practice. I mean, I remember the first time I was yelled at in one of my early appointments. It just came out of, I just didn't expect that in the church, but
Exactly.
it's everywhere, and you learn how to handle it. Someone else asked, you talked a number of times about making sure the meeting length is agreed upon and that you stick to it. So what's considered a fair length of time to have a meeting? Is it an hour? Is it 90 minutes? They don't want people to lose interest or accomplish nothing.
I
So
think generally speaking, an hour is good. And I say that here, we're doing an hour and a half meeting tonight. So, but no, I mean, I think sometimes that's determined by the culture or whatever. But one of the books I recommend at the end is getting Fat-Free Meetings. It's an old book by Bert Albert. And he even talks about, have meetings standing up. Because if people are standing, you don't lollygag, right? And so, but I think an hour is a good an hour, 75 minutes is often really a good length.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think I'll jump to Slido in a second, but in our Q&A, the last question we have in the Q&A is, in this particular scenario, the pastor is leading the meeting, and apparently there's an outsider who's not a part of the team, and they're giving an opportunity to talk. What do you do in those situations if it's not somebody who's regularly a part of the team, and they're invited to give their opinion, I guess?
I'm not sure I know enough about the scenario to be able to answer that with any kind of authority.
And I'm going to just say to my good friend Kathy, who's been in a couple of my training Tuesdays, if they could give me a little more detail, because sometimes I know in meetings we'll have an outside person who is a quote unquote expert who's brought in specifically to talk. So Kathy, if you could just put in a little more information, that would be helpful. And then looking at Slido, what if that person who, we've talked about the devil advocate. What if that is what's needed in order to challenge the status quo, in order to challenge the way we've always done it? So it's not the assigned role, but everyone is just going along until that one person says, wait a minute, why are we doing it this way?
And I think that's why you do make it an assigned role, because what you want to do is you want to normalize really good group process. You want to normalize good decision making. And I think that's because what you've done is you've given permission, and it might not, you take the burden of the one person who may feel obligated to do that because that's their natural bent, or nobody else is doing it. No one else is speaking up. No one else is as prepared. And so I think you kind of take the burden off the shoulders of someone, and you talk about that. If you're having to make some challenging discussions or create change, I think you talk about as a group, what is going to help us be the best group we can be? And I think I want us to try this. It might not work, but let's try it and see. And I think that wherever you can have multiple roles, like someone maybe is setting up, maybe you rearrange the space so that it works really well. One of the groups I have, because we've been doing a lot of meeting on Zoom. And so what we've done is we've built in more socials. And so what we do, again, the idea that we're taking care of the social emotional needs, getting to know each other better, so we function better via Zoom. So I think being willing to experiment and say, let's, I keep saying since the pandemic, but since the pandemic, and some of my meetings, like the full faculty still meet via Zoom. And two of my groups decided that we were going to build in an in-person meeting at least twice this semester, because there's new faculty who've come in and we don't know them in the last 3 years. And so, I think you say, okay, what is working? What isn't working? What might we try to see if we can improve things? Going back to the expert, I don't know if the group would say, if you're not a member, maybe you're not able to speak publicly, but maybe if it's an expert, any contribution to the minutes would be in writing. Like
I'm getting a little more clarity. So it's a council meeting, and I'm guessing because in the United Methodist Church, only one committee is closed, and that's our staff parish or pastor parish relations committee. So I guess it's an open council meeting, and somebody who just shows up takes over the meeting.
Well, I would look and see what the bylaws are, because it may be that someone who just shows up should be submitting questions or comments in writing to be read by who's in charge. And it may be in the spirit of doing things decently and in order to have something like that. Yeah.
Now, what are your thoughts on committee or team covenants in order to lay some of this out ahead of time?
I definitely think it's great, and it doesn't fit every group, but I do think sometimes you start with like on group projects. Seriously, why are we doing that? Because that's how the work world works. But that's why I talk about, like, with that one group, your quality of your project is going to follow your process, and I preach that at the very beginning. But I think you also maybe start with what has not worked in the past for you. So you might have some time where the group talks about what they really desire to happen. I'd love to be part of a team that does something, right, that's functional. And so as a group, you might create some rules. Like, for example, we make a covenant to be there, or I contact someone if I'll be on time, right? I will not be late, but also we start on time, we end on time. So I think you look at it from all different ways. What is the responsibility of the members? What's the responsibility of the group? And what can we implement that deviates from past experience to avoid what we've experienced negatively in the past? It might be gossip. It might be we're talking about things that are outside the meeting. And so sometimes it might just simply be a reminder, like this one group I'm in that I co-lead, that everything is confidential. We talk about what that means in the context of that group. And so then that again, it becomes a source of pride and pleasure, if that's the right word, that we're doing what we said we were going to do. And I think you can address a lot of those things that are going to create problems down the road by dealing with them up front. Or if you see things are getting off or they're going down a wrong path, is stop and talk about that. I'm concerned about how we're managing as a group. I might say that as a leader, and let's talk about that. What can I do differently? What do we as a group need to do differently? And let people share that.
One last question, and I know you have some next steps and follow-ups, but that came to me. Any strategies for handling or preemptively managing the meetings that end up taking place after the meeting, or as we like to call them, the parking lot meetings, where everything was talked about in the meeting, but then afterwards a group meets someplace else and either undermines or tries to change what the rest of the group decided?
I think part of that is going back to the covenant that you mentioned, that the idea that we don't have these side conversations. We're not talking about things outside the meeting. For example, this one group I'm with, we would not even share the handouts. Even if it's positive news, we don't share it.
Okay.
And so I think that's part of it, that we need to address things as a group. And so if it's something that's not resolved, we move it to the next meeting. That's what that summary is about. We've moved it to the next agenda. And we talk about whatever is discussed in here stays in here. And that means that we don't discuss it outside the meeting. So I think you address that head on.
I'll tell you, this has been wonderful information, Teresa. I mean, I'm walking away with, we need to build relationships. We need to do some spiritual work. Food. I mean, come on, we're United Methodist. Food.
I'm a big believer in food.
Excellent. So what are our next steps?
So let me just pull up my slides again.
Perfect.
So let's see. Yeah, are we here? Okay. So just again, our main points are that you are doing things that are working. So I just encourage you just to keep doing those things that help your group be functional. I hope that I've said something tonight that's maybe sparked an idea or maybe a different perspective on one of your groups. So I just encourage you maybe to try out and implement one of the ideas that we talked about, as far as really stepping back and understanding why the dynamics are the way they are and how you might implement some change with the group. And remember, it's not all on us to manage the group process. Once the group has adopted the guidelines, the covenant, the boundaries that we've agreed on, and we've enforced it, they'll adopt them and they'll enforce them for you. Think of that big auditorium with the college students where they did that for the speaker. Again, I thank you for participating. I did want to mention that there's a lot of books out there, but these are two that I like. The Fat-Free Meetings is an older resource, but I think it's available on Amazon, and I think that it has some practical ideas there. Crucial Conversations is Switzler and colleagues. There's actually a series, I think maybe 4 books now, that really are coaching books, I think. But when you're having those difficult or challenging conversations, whether it's in a management role or an intervention role, I think that their books, and I'd start with Crucial Conversations, could be really helpful, either if you're in counseling families or couples, or just as a leader or manager, that you're having those one-on-one conversations with people that are difficult. And it might be that, that natural born devil's advocate who plays that prominent role sometimes in groups. But I have enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you. Oh, I am so glad you could take the time to be with us. If you all could just drop a thank you in the chat for Teresa. As we close down tonight, I have just a few announcements. Our final training Tuesday of 2024 is next Tuesday, December 17th. people don't get excited about this one, Teresa. We're having a training Tuesday on statistical reports knowledge, how to handle our statistical reports. And I know it's close. We're in the Advent season. It's close to Christmas, and it's a busy time. But as soon as the new year rolls around, people, we have to get on to the statistical reports. But if you can't make it because of your schedule, of course, we have all of this recorded, and we'll have this available. So go to your Baltimore-Washington conference website or the Peninsula Delaware conference website, and you can register for next Tuesday's Training Tuesday. Again, Teresa, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has absolutely been wonderful. And you can see.
Thank you. And your comments are so sweet. Thank you very much.
You can see that in the chat, and we will have you back. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your week and an enjoyable Advent as we prepare to celebrate the coming of Christ, both then and in the future. So thank you again, and good night, all.